I don't remember much about my parents, not their faces, not the warmth of their hands, not even the sound of their voices. But I remember the day they left me. I was 5. Too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to feel it. The cold. The emptiness. The fear. It was raining that day, a heavy autumn rain that turned the streets into rivers of mud. My mother held my hand as we walked up the stone steps of the orphanage. Her grip was firm, but there was no comfort in it. My father walked ahead, his face unreadable. I was wearing my favorite red sweater, the one with the loose threads at the sleeves. It was the last thing I would own from my old life. The building smelled like damp wood and something stale, like old books and forgotten places. Inside, children's voices echoed down long hallways, but they weren't happy voices. They were distant, detached. Like ghosts. A woman in a brown cardigan greeted us. She had tired eyes but a kind face. She bent down to my level, smiled softly, and asked my name. I turned to my mother for reassurance. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring past me, at the floor, at the walls, anywhere but at my face. I remember tugging at her coat. "Mama?" My voice was small, uncertain. She flinched but didn't speak. Then my father cleared his throat. "His name is Daniel." Just like that, it felt like I wasn't theirs anymore. I belonged to the space between them, to the air that carried my father's voice. The woman nodded and scribbled something down. Then she looked at me again and smiled. "Daniel, sweetheart, why don't you come with me? We have lots of toys in the playroom." I didn't move. I didn't want toys. I wanted to go home. But then my father did something I still dream about to this day. He took a step back. Then another. Then my mother. They were moving away from me. I reached for them, but the woman gently grabbed my shoulders, holding me back. And then they turned. And walked away. Just like that. I screamed. I kicked. I fought against the woman's grip. "No. No, 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 Mama. Papa. Don't go. I'll be good. Please, please don't leave me." I saw my mother hesitate, just for a second. Her shoulders tensed. Her step faltered. But my father placed a hand on her back, guiding her forward. And they kept walking. Out the door. Into the rain. I ran to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass, watching them disappear into the gray mist. I don't know how long I stood there, waiting for them to turn around, to change their minds, to come back for me. But they never did. That was the day I stopped belonging to anyone. The day I stopped believing in love. The day I became no one. The first thing I learned in the orphanage was that love was a privilege, not a right. In the beginning, I cried every night. I waited by the window, hoping my parents would come back, that maybe this was a mistake, that maybe I had been bad, and they just needed time to forgive me. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. No one came. The orphanage was not a cruel place, but it was not kind either. The caretakers weren't unfeeling, but they had too many mouths to feed, too many tears to wipe, too many nightmares to soothe. There was no room for special attention. If you wanted comfort, you had to find it yourself. If you wanted to survive, you had to toughen up. The older boys learned this quickly. They ruled the hallways, the playroom, the dining area. They took the best blankets in the winter, the biggest portions at dinner, and the warmest spots by the heater. They picked their allies, and if you weren't one of them, you were no one. And I was no one. At first, I tried to be liked. I gave away my food to the bigger boys, hoping it would make them see me. It didn't. I let them take my toys, hoping they'd play with me. They didn't. I was invisible. But then, one day, I fought back. It was over something stupid, a crust of bread. I hadn't eaten much that day, and my stomach was hollow with hunger. When one of the older boys, Marcus, reached for my plate, I grabbed his wrist and held on. For a second, he just stared at me, surprised. Then he hit me. Hard. The room went silent. I tasted blood in my mouth, but I didn't let go. I hit him back. Harder. No one had ever fought Marcus before. He was the king of the orphanage, the leader of the forgotten. And for the first time, he looked unsure. The fight didn't last long. An adult broke it up before it could turn brutal, but after that, something changed. The other kids started looking at me differently. Not as a target. Not as a nobody. But as something else. I wasn't one of them yet, but I wasn't invisible anymore. That was my first lesson in survival. You don't have to be the strongest. You just have to be strong enough that people think twice before hurting you. I toughened up after that. I learned to fight. I learned to steal extra food when the caretakers weren't looking. I learned how to make people laugh so they wouldn't see me as a threat, how to read the room so I knew when to speak and when to stay silent. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the smartest. But I was the one who could adapt. And in a place like this, that was enough. Years passed. I watched other kids come and go, lucky ones who got adopted, unlucky ones who ran away and never came back. No one ever picked me. I stopped waiting for it. Instead, I planned for the future. I read every book I could find. I listened to the teachers when we had school lessons. I memorized everything, storing knowledge like a weapon. Because I knew, one day, I would leave this place. Not through adoption. Not through luck. Through will. I would make something of myself. I would build a life so big, so grand, that my parents, wherever they were, would hear my name. And when that day came, I wouldn't be the one begging. They would. And I would make them regret ever walking away. I never thought I would see them again. By the time I turned 18, I had long buried the memory of the rain-soaked day they left me at the orphanage. It wasn't that I forgot, I would never forget, but I forced myself to move forward. Holding on to the pain would have made me weak, and I couldn't afford weakness. I had no family, no safety net. I had only myself. So I worked hard. I studied relentlessly, earning scholarships that paid my way through college. While other students partied, I stayed up late, teaching myself everything from business to psychology. I networked, shaking hands with people who mattered, learning the rules of the game. By the time I was 30, I wasn't just successful, I was powerful. The boy they abandoned in an orphanage was gone. I was Daniel Carter, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech companies in the world. My name was in Forbes, my face on magazine covers. People who once ignored me now scrambled to earn my approval. I had everything. Then, one evening, my assistant buzzed my office. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "there's a couple here to see you. They say they're your parents." For a moment, I thought I misheard. My parents? No. That wasn't possible. My parents didn't exist. Not anymore. But then she said their names. And I felt the world tilt. I didn't answer right away. My fingers curled into a fist on my desk. I wasn't the scared little boy from the orphanage anymore, I was a man who had built his own empire. But in that moment, I felt like I was 5 years old again, watching them disappear into the rain. I took a slow breath. Then another. Send them in. A minute later, the door opened. And there they were. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. I thought they would look the same, frozen in time, just as they had been the day they left me. But they had aged. My father's hair was graying, his posture not as straight as I remembered. My mother had wrinkles around her mouth, lines that hadn't been there before. For a second, no one spoke. Then my mother let out a shaky breath, eyes glistening. Daniel. The sound of my name and her voice sent an ugly chill down my spine. I leaned back in my chair, studying them. It's been a long time. My father cleared his throat. It has. You've done well for yourself. I gave a humorless smile. I had to. They shifted awkwardly. My mother looked at my office, at the expensive furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She swallowed. I could see it in their eyes. Regret. Not for abandoning me, but for realizing that the child they threw away had become something greater than they ever would. Finally, I leaned forward, lacing my fingers together. Why are you here? My father sighed. We made mistakes, son. Son. I almost laughed. We thought we were doing what was best, my mother said quickly. Back then, we were struggling. We were young. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. We didn't have the means to give you a good life. I tilted my head. So instead of trying, you left me in an orphanage? They both flinched. Silence. Then my father spoke, voice low. We regretted it. Every day. I stared at them. Liars. They never came back. Not once. If they had regretted it, they would have tried to find me years ago. But they hadn't. So why now? Then I saw it. The way my father's fingers twitched, how my mother bit her lip. The hesitation. And it clicked. They weren't here because of guilt. They were here because they needed something. How much? I asked flatly. My mother blinked. What? I kept my expression unreadable. How much money do you need? She turned pale. My father's jaw clenched. So that was it. They didn't want me. They wanted my wealth. For a moment, a heavy silence hung between us. Then I let out a slow breath and smiled. A cold, calculated smile. They thought they could just walk in and rewrite the past. That I would welcome them back with open arms. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was no longer that abandoned little boy. I was someone else now. And I was going to make them regret ever coming back. I leaned back in my chair, watching them squirm under my gaze. My mother looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously. My father, always the more prideful one, clenched his jaw, but I could see it, the quiet desperation in his eyes. They needed me. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was cold. You haven't answered my question, I said, my voice calm, almost bored. How much do you need? My father exhaled sharply, as if the words pained him. We're struggling, Daniel. We made mistakes, yes, but life hasn't been easy for us either. For us. I almost laughed. Your mother lost her job, he continued. And my business, well, the market hasn't been kind. We've had to sell the house. We're drowning in debt. The bank is ready to take everything. I let his words hang in the air. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Would you be here if I was still that abandoned kid in the orphanage? If I was working a regular job, barely scraping by? Silence. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father shifted uncomfortably. That was all the answer I needed. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You're in luck, I said, standing up. I do have money. Relief flooded their faces. But I let the words settle, their expressions freezing mid-hope. Nothing in this world comes for free. You should know that better than anyone. My father frowned. What are you saying? I walked over to my desk, pulling open a drawer. Inside was a crisp white envelope, already prepared. I tossed it onto the table between us. My mother reached for it first. She pulled out the paper inside, her face twisting in confusion as her eyes scanned the page. What is this?" she whispered. I folded my arms. A contract. My father took the paper from her hands, his eyes narrowing as he read. It's simple, I explained. You want money? Fine. But you'll have to earn it. I watched them closely, enjoying the way my words made them uneasy. I've set up a press conference for tomorrow, I continued, my voice smooth, almost casual. You're going to stand in front of the cameras and tell the world the truth. Their heads snapped up. The truth, my mother echoed. I nodded. You're going to tell them how you abandoned me. How you left your own child in an orphanage because he didn't fit into your new life. You're going to admit that you never looked back. That you only came here today because you needed my money. My mother paled. Daniel, please. And when you're done, I cut in, ignoring the tremor in her voice, I'll write you a check. Enough to clear your debts. Enough to give you a fresh start. I paused. Then, just for good measure, I twisted the knife. But you'll never see me again. My father's face darkened. This is ridiculous, he snapped, slamming the contract onto my desk. You want to humiliate us? Drag our names through the mud? I tilted my head. No. I just want the truth to be known. His hands clenched into fists. We're your parents. I laughed. A real, bitter laugh. No, I said coldly. You stopped being my parents the day you walked away. My mother wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. Daniel, please, we made a mistake. But we love you. We do. Love? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Funny. I thought love meant sticking around. I thought love meant fighting for someone, even when it's hard. I don't remember you fighting for me. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. My father sat stiffly beside her, his pride keeping him from doing the same. I picked up the contract and held it out. This is my offer. Take it or leave it. They didn't move. Seconds passed. Then my father stood up. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he walked into my office. And I saw it. Not regret. Not love. Resentment. Not because of what they did to me. But because I had one. He turned without a word, grabbing my mother by the arm and pulling her toward the door. She hesitated. Just for a second. She looked back at me, eyes full of something, shame, sadness, maybe even longing. But I felt nothing. And then they were gone. I stared at the door for a long time. Then, slowly, I sat back down at my desk. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt powerful. But all I felt was the same emptiness I had carried since I was 5 years old. Because no matter how much success I had, no matter how much I proved them wrong, some scars never fade. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the city lights casting long shadows across my room. I should have felt victorious. I had the chance to humiliate them, to make them feel the weight of their betrayal, and I took it. They walked away empty-handed, just as they had left me all those years ago. So why did it feel like I lost something, too? I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me. The image of my mother's tear-streaked face, the way she hesitated at the door. The look in my father's eyes, not guilt, not remorse, but resentment. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself they didn't matter. Then, just past midnight, my phone buzzed. I frowned and reached for it. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something, curiosity, instinct, or maybe something deeper, made me pick up. I put the phone to my ear. Who is this? Silence. Then, a shaky breath. Daniel, it's me. I didn't need her to say her name. I knew the voice. Even after all these years, I knew. My grip on the phone tightened. How did you get this number? More silence. Then, please. I just need to talk to you. I almost hung up. But then she whispered, I know you hate us. And I don't blame you. But I just need you to know the truth. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to hear it. I had spent my whole life telling myself the truth didn't matter. That they left me, and that was all there was to it. But instead of hanging up, I found myself saying, you have 5 minutes. She let out a shaky breath, as if she hadn't expected me to listen. I wanted to keep you, she said softly. I swear to you, Daniel, I did. But your father, he wouldn't hear of it. He said we couldn't afford another child. That we'd never get out of debt with you holding us back. I stayed silent. She continued, voice breaking. I fought. I fought for you. I begged him to reconsider. But he made up his mind. He said if I didn't leave you, he would leave us. He said we had to choose a fresh start or a lifetime of struggle. I swallowed hard. And you chose him. A small sob escaped her lips. I was scared, Daniel. I was weak. And I've hated myself every day since. I stared at the floor, my chest tight. I wanted to believe she was lying. That she was just another manipulator, trying to ease her guilt. But I heard something in her voice that I had never heard before. Truth. Raw, painful truth. I tried to come back, she whispered. Years later. I went to the orphanage, but they said you had already been moved to a different home. I searched for you, but we didn't have the resources. And by the time I found out your name again, you were already a man. I clenched my jaw. So you waited until you needed money to reach out? She let out a choked breath. No. I should have come sooner. I should have tried harder. I should have been braver. Silence stretched between us. And then she said something that shattered whatever walls I had built. I never stopped loving you. My throat burned. I hated her. I hated her for being weak. I hated her for choosing him. I hated her for not trying hard enough. But I believed her. And that made it so much worse. I could hear her crying softly on the other end. For the first time in my life, I had power over her. I could hang up. I could walk away, just like she did. Or I could choose something else. I could choose to be better than them. To be better than the pain they had left me with. I took a slow breath, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. A soft sob. I know. But, I hesitated. If you need help, I can give you something. Not because you deserve it. But because I won't be like him. She let out a quiet cry, as if those words alone were worth more than money. I exhaled. This is the last time we talk. And then, before she could say anything else, I hung up. I sat there in the dark, the phone still in my hand, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Maybe I had one. Or maybe, for the first time, I had finally let go. The morning after that call, I sat in my office, staring at the city skyline. My coffee had gone cold. The contract I had given my parents lay crumpled in the trash. I should have felt lighter. After years of anger, after building my entire life to prove that I didn't need them, I had finally gotten closure. So why did it still feel like something was missing? The past wouldn't change. Nothing would erase the years I spent alone, the nights I cried myself to sleep as a child, the emptiness that followed me into adulthood. But I had made my choice. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for me. I called my assistant. Set up a bank transfer. She hesitated. For how much? I thought about it. Enough to give my mother a fresh start, but not enough for them to think they could rely on me. I gave her the number. A large sum, but not life-changing. Just enough to make sure she wouldn't end up homeless, that she could get back on her feet. And make sure it's only in her name, I added. Not his. My assistant didn't ask questions. She never did. Understood. I hung up, letting out a slow breath. It wasn't forgiveness. Not completely. But it was a choice. A choice to be free. A week passed. Then another. I didn't hear from them again. No more desperate calls, no more pleading. I thought that was the end of it. But one afternoon, my secretary walked in with a small, unmarked envelope. This arrived for you. No return address. I frowned, taking it from her. Inside was a letter. Daniel. I won't call again. I won't ask for anything more. You don't owe me anything. But I need you to know one thing before we disappear from your life forever. I should have chosen you. I'm sorry. I hope, wherever life takes you, that you find happiness. That you find the love I wasn't brave enough to give you. You deserved better. Mom. I read it twice. Then a third time. And for the first time in years, I felt something crack inside me. I wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. But for the first time, I let myself grieve. Not for them. For the boy I used to be. And then, slowly, I let him go. Because my past did not define me. I did.